Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the podcast titled When Wildfire Comes. My name is Dr. Christopher Potter, and I'm a wildfire scientist with over 30 years of experience working for NASA, our space and nation's space agency, and also with local communities who have been impacted by wildland fires in California and the West. I've studied this wildfire interface phenomenon of burning into local communities from unexpected or sudden wildfires using satellite imagery and ground measurements for almost all the most destructive fires in the Western United States, and published dozens of science papers on the events. I myself live in a high risk wildfire zone in Northern California, so I know what it's like to live with that kind of risk every day. So today we're going to do a little bit different kind of podcast. It is based on research that I've done on the now very well-known Altadena uh, Eaton fire of January 2025. This was one of the most destructive wildfires we've had in California in our recorded history. It started on January 7th, 2025, in Eaton Canyon in the San Gabriel Mountains, just to the east of the the city of Altadena. And powerful Santa Ana winds were blowing that day, driving the fire into the foothill communities of Altadena and Pasadena. In the end, the fire did kill 19 people and destroyed more than 9,000 buildings, making it the fifth deadliest and the second most destructive wildfire in California's history, just behind the Camp Fire in Northern California. So we're going to go over today a number of slides that you can find on our podcast webpage. That link will be is in the description of the podcast, just below where you started the recording to be played, and so you can go to that Facebook page and go to an album, a photo album of slides that is called Eaton Fire Comes to Altadena. There are 15 slides in there that we'll be looking at today, and they will show us and show you, as I describe them, what happened during the fire. And it's an analysis to explain really the patterns in the number of structures that were destroyed in Altadena during the Eaton fire, how it unfolded, and what was controlling or regulating the spread of the fire through the urban area, because it was both a wildland fire and an urban fire. And the firefighters who responded to it on the days of January 7th, 8th, 9th were trying to protect the city of Altadena as a first priority, and did a lot of evacuations before any firefighting could be happening in the hills above Altadena, in the San Gabriel Mountains above Altadena, which were heavily populated with brush and shrub cover, and then finally in the upper reaches of the fire extent, there was tree cover that burned on and continued the fire progression to the north, away from Altadena on January 10th through a few days after that. But if you will go with me then to the first slide and the link of the album. They're numbered 1 through 15. And in that first slide, you'll see that there's a map of the areas that were burned in Altadena and the homes that were completely destroyed. There were, like I said, over 9,000 homes destroyed in the city of Altadena and in the surrounding communities there. So this analysis is going to go back and look at how that happened, where the fire came from, and how it spread into the community, and what lessons we might learn from how the fire unfolded, and how the burning went from both the wildland into the urban area and then spread from house to house throughout the urban area. But it's important to look at Altadena first before the fire. And one in the image on the left-hand side, labeled January 6, 2025, you can see it was uh, a town that was dominated by neighborhoods that were fairly low density housing. That is, there was a small house, relatively small house, on a relatively medium sized lot with a yard around it, some trees around it. And so it was not a densely developed area. Most of it was low density and even open space towards the north and the eastern boundaries of the town. And you can see in these before and after pictures how much of the area, how much of a neighborhood actually burned to the ground completely in slide one. So let's go to slide two. And in slide two, what I've done is shown you the Eaton fire boundary that ended up being mapped and is placed in California, of course, in the inset map, not far from the Palisades fire, which was burning at the same time as the Eaton fire. But this is the Eaton fire boundary. It wasn't a huge area relative to other wildfires that have burned in California, but it was sizable and it did cover much of the northern section of Altadena and parts of eastern Pasadena as well. And so here you can see the boundary and the San Gabriel Mountains, the different canyons here, and I overlaid a grid of neighborhoods that I've used for analysis of each neighborhood block, which is about 200 by 200 meters, exactly 200 by 200 meters in that grid. So we can break down the city of Altadena into its various neighborhoods this way, and then analyze how the fire came to them and what was controlling the fire once it came there and burned all those many houses and other residential structures in the city of Altadena. So in the third slide, what I show you here is the vegetation land cover. In the open space in the San Gabriel Mountains was mostly shrub cover with some forest, as I said, to the north and to the east of the in the fire boundary. And then the developed areas are shown in the city of Altadena in various shades of blue. The lightest is open space around the perimeter of the city, which means open grasslands, golf courses, perhaps areas that don't have many houses, but they do have open parks. The low density area or low intensity area is the kind I showed in the opening slide, which reveals that there are small houses on fairly large lots. The medium density area are slightly larger houses on slightly smaller lots, or they're building over more of the lot area. And then in the darkest areas, which were very infrequent or common in Altadena, are high density areas, which are apartment buildings, shopping areas. They're areas that have been built up into second, third story buildings for the main part, and they don't have a great deal of vegetation and burnable material around them. So they're generally the kind of area in a city where you'd see multi-story buildings and a lot of sidewalks and what we call pervious surfaces of concrete and so forth. And so in one of these areas, one of these neighborhoods, I buffered out five different actually zones around them. The ones that extend out to 1 kilometer, which is about a half a mile, and then 1 to 2, 2 to 3, 3 to 4, and 4 to 5. And so those are zones we can look at as the influence of the vegetation and the burning around the city may have influenced and controlled the fire and the number of structures lost, because that's really what we're looking at here, the number of structures lost in each one of these neighborhood areas. So this is how each square gets buffered out with its influence zone of at an interval of 1 kilometer. And that's the framework for this study. Here is in slide number 4, you can see the vegetation fuel loads. They were quite heavy in the forested areas above the San Gabriel Mountain drainages near Altadena. They were dry, but they were still heavily vegetated with woody species of trees like a California walnut and madrone and other San Gabriel Mountain woodland species. You can see now I've labeled where the fire started now down in the lower central part in Eaton Canyon. So this is where the fire started at was reported at around 6:15 p.m. on January 7th. And there wasn't a great deal of vegetation, as you can see in this area, or in the immediate buffer zone, say 1 kilometer buffer zone around Altadena. But within Altadena, there were some areas that did have pretty heavy tree cover, shrub cover, as you can see in the medium green area. So it was a fairly well covered, tree covered city before the fire, and had a lot of vegetation in the yards around it, green grass vegetation, but a lot of it had gone brown because it was a severe drought, and so it wasn't maybe as green as we would love it to be. An ideal situation of a good rainfall year. We're entering or coming out of a very severe drought period during and just before the period of the Eaton fire. This is an image from December 2024, just before the fire started. So you can see where the fire is going to start. It's going to move into these areas and be swept by the Santa Ana winds, mostly to the west and the south direction is what the winds are blowing at the time. But Eaton Canyon was a very complex and steep canyon, so the winds started to swirl, and they started to swirl in all directions and move the embers that were created from the fire and the start of the fire under a down power line or a damaged power line in Eaton Canyon. And those embers were swirling in all directions, north, south, east, west, with the erratic winds that were occurring, but at very high velocities of 60, 70, 80 miles an hour at that time. Very unusual Santa Ana winds conditions, and you can hear about those in another podcast of this series where we talk about those Santa Ana winds and winds in general, climate weather for fires in California. So moving on then to slide 5, this is an image that shows from the satellite during the satellite that goes over twice a day, the NASA VIRS satellite, which images the radiative power of the fire. That is, how intense is the fire burning at the time the satellite goes over. And so you can see where in the brightest red and orange areas where it was burning very hot at any time during the fire. In the city of Altadena, yes, in that lower area of the southeastern section, not far from the ignition point in Eaton Canyon, it did burn hot, and many of the homes were burned completely to the ground in a matter of a few hours. It also burned very hot about 2 or 3 kilometers from the city center, up in the mountains near Echo Mountain, or just to the east of Echo Mountain. And across a band that moved into the city of Altadena from east to west. So overall, these are not enormously hot radiative power values that we see in other big fires in California. But in these hot red areas, it was burning very hot, and the embers were being produced and being blown in the wind towards the city of Altadena and swirling all around. So here again in slide 6 is the map in the green dots of the structures that were damaged or destroyed, 9,000 of them. Only 800 of them were partially destroyed. The rest of them were completely lost, burned to the ground, as you could see in that very first slide that I showed when we opened the talk. So these are the ones that were mapped by CAL FIRE, our state agency that goes out and maps where each house was and its level of destruction from the fire. And so this is the map that we use to locate areas. And what we want to do is explain why these structures burn, why they burn to the ground, and not structures in the rest of the city, and why they somehow made it through. So what we did was apply a model. It's a model that is in the family of an artificial intelligence model, a machine learning model, and in it we input variables that could explain why the fire burned where it did and which structures were destroyed. So each structure is a point that we try to predict. Did it burn or did it not burn? And what this shows you is that we have a very high predictive capability overall, a very significant capability in slide 7, explaining over close to 60% of all the variation in those points you see across the map, those green points. And the variables that explain most of it are the developed low intensity and medium intensity development structure of the city itself, in the neighborhood itself, within the 200 by 200 meter grid that we're looking at one at a time. And that is the most important factor that contributed to the burning and the location of where the completely destroyed structures were. But there are other variables, the summed vegetation fuel, green fuel, at 1 kilometer away, 2 kilometers away, and even at 4 kilometers away, had some impact on the where the fire burned. So there's an implication here that the vegetation, even almost a mile away from the neighborhood in which we're looking at, had some impact, its density, on how many structures were lost. And so this is what tells us we've got a combination of the types of development that was present in the neighborhood. Was it low density, medium density? Open space didn't burn nearly as often with destructive power and destructive fire radiative power. So we learn a lot from this sort of analysis of the statistics behind this pattern that's going on, and really it's the way you develop your city and its proximity to heavy fuel loads that determine which homes are going to be destroyed within a city of many other homes that were somehow spared. Slide 8 simply shows us that in the light blue dots, these are the fire radiative areas that were burning, and you can again see where the fire started in Eaton Canyon, in the natural area there in the lower right-hand quadrant, and how it burned into the city of Altadena, and even some structures that burned in East Pasadena. But all these areas burned in the light blue dots at the same time, same days, January 8th through 9th. So they were associated with one another, and the vegetation at 4 kilometers or 5 kilometers away from the city could have been burning and moving embers into the areas on the northern side of Altadena, along East Loma Alta Drive, Rubio Canyon, Echo Mountain, and some of the other areas on the far western side of the city. So because they were all burning at the same time. Here's a fire progression slide in slide 9. If you go to that, you'll see the entry into Altadena at about 6:18 from eastern hillside above Eaton Canyon and in the wash, and it starts to move into Altadena Drive and Canyon Close Drive. And then this all comes from reporting from local observations and the Los Angeles Times coverage of the fire. Winds are now reaching 80 miles an hour, and they're causing a shower of sparks. They're causing embers to be swept along the ground into the neighborhoods, into the yards, and then bumping up against the houses, getting into their vents, and starting those homes on fire. By 9 o'clock, there's a shift towards the west, and we're seeing a lot more fire on dense residential neighborhood blocks past North Lake Avenue, North Marengo Avenue, and on Fair Oaks Avenue. And then eventually, by about 11 o'clock at night, the city has been thoroughly burned. The fire is not just entering through that single front, that front that came from Altadena, from Eaton Canyon, but also from other areas where to the north and to the east, and where that hadn't been reported before, 5 hours before, and now we're seeing new entry of sparks into the area, and new areas on the northern side and western side of the city being ignited. In slide 10, you can see the overlay and the progression of for the first hour, where you do get a shower, a huge ember cast, as it's called here, from Eaton Canyon at around 6:30, right into that southeastern parts of Altadena, where the firefighters first respond and start to evacuate people. Then a few hours later, 6 hours later, we've got many more neighborhoods on the grid that are burning, multiple homes burning in the center of Altadena. And this is by about 11 o'clock p.m. There's also fire burning to the eastern side of Eaton Canyon. And now we've got more rural homes and open space areas burning at 11 o'clock. And the firefighters are also trying to respond to that and evacuate people at the same time. By 3 a.m., we've got entire streets on fire in northern Altadena, and the fire is completely out of control throughout the residential areas here. They're simply trying to evacuate people, and the fire is burning hot in the area around Echo Peak, just to the north, and probably burning embers and blowing embers into the north part of Altadena at this point. So, what do we learn from all this? What is the upshot, and what can be done to try to mitigate the next fire that would come to a community like Altadena? Well, in slide 13, you see a pseudo sort of proposition or plan that a buffer zone, a fuel break area, could be created between the northern section and eastern sections of Altadena, the city of Altadena. Rather than rebuilding there, a 1 kilometer swath would be created that would have mostly impervious surfaces. It could have parklands, but no structures. Certainly no structures that are rebuilt in the low density development mode that we've seen them dominate Altadena before. But this would be an area where firefighters could work and keep the embers from spreading from Eaton Canyon or from the Pasadena Canyon area or the Millard Canyon area into, as you can see, they're mapped here on the map, down into, they would have a chance to fight them, put them out, and before they were swept along the ground, as they many times were during the wind event that occurred here, the high wind event, and into the yards and the neighborhoods, and light one fire after another, one house into another, spreading that way. So a buffer zone like this would go a long way to giving firefighters an area to stage and to use the water they have and to fight any embers that are being blown into it from the washes above it. And so, because the city is at the base of a very steep canyon area, getting up and fighting fire in this area is almost impossible when you're mostly concerned about thousands of structures on fire in the city at the same time and just getting people into a safe area. So this is one proposition. The other proposition would be when homes are rebuilt, they're rebuilt at a higher density with smaller areas that have open yards and grassy cover in them, more impervious surfaces, more multi-story buildings that are built of modern fire-resistant materials, metal, glass, stucco. These are the kind of materials that will resist the fire, that give the firefighters a chance to put out that fire before it spreads to the next building. But building back at much higher density would be a plan that is consistent with what the science says, controlled or regulated or caused the loss of so many structures in the city, which was basically a low density area of very small homes on fairly large lots covered with lots of vegetation in those yards that could spread the fire, or at least along the grass as the embers were swept along the ground. And you can see videos online of that happening if you just go to YouTube and search for videos of the Eaton fire in Altadena, and it's spread through embers. So this is one plan to do that. And again, having this buffer zone would protect the low density areas that may be rebuilt, but that buffer zone is so important for the firefighters to be able to come in and defend the homes that are going to be rebuilt there in the near future. So again, just looking at Altadena, it was a city with low density housing, some medium density housing, and hardly any high density housing. And this is a recipe for very much a difficult job for the firefighters to defend lots like that are spread out with small houses on them, lots of area in between to move between and move the firefighting equipment between. A much higher density development would be much easier to protect. And I'll just make one quick comparison here in the final slide 15 to the land cover classes in the San Francisco Bay Area. And it is remarkably similar in land cover of the developed areas to Altadena. It is mostly low density and medium density lots, the same sort of building in cities such as Palo Alto, even San Mateo, and then southward into Sunnyvale, Cupertino, Los Gatos, Campbell, all these areas, and on the East Bay, on the eastern side of San Jose and the Alum Rock neighborhoods, all the way up to Fremont and Hayward. These are the same type of neighborhoods with the same type of development that would be so vulnerable to a spread of a fire into those areas, and they would burn much like Altadena did if the winds were favorable, if the winds were high, if the winds were blowing either from the west to east, which would drive it into the peninsula cities like Palo Alto and Sunnyvale and Mountain View, or blowing from the east, which would blow it into Fremont, Hayward, and even possibly into Pleasanton and Livermore, because they are developed the same way. You can see the dark areas of high intensity development are really in the cities of San Jose and in the downtown areas right along the 101 highway corridor. So the rest of it is much like Altadena, and that should give us a pause about the kind of vulnerability that cities in the Bay Area also have to deal with in the same way. So these are the lessons learned from an analysis done of Altadena, and I hope that it's been enlightening to see that the fire started very quickly. It progressed from an area that was thought to be very low vegetated, very low risk, but because there was enough brush underneath the area where the fire ignited, and the winds were just perfect to spread it into and along the ground into the city of Altadena and into those low development areas, low intensity development areas, and from there it could not be stopped. So we understand a lot about this now, and mitigation steps could be taken and corrective steps in rebuilding Altadena to make it a more fire resistant and fire ready city for both defense and to retard the burning of house to house pattern fires that could again result in thousands of homes being burned overnight. So thanks for listening to this. We may do another one like this for a couple of the other fires that have occurred in the wildland urban interface, because it's an interesting way of looking at them and analyzing them and understanding better what the lessons could be for rebuilding. So listeners, thank you for spending time with us on the podcast When Wildfire Comes. We'll see you again soon, or you'll listen again soon, we hope, and stay fire safe as we approach the hot parts of this coming year of 2026. Thanks a lot, and stay safe.